Each step is moving, it's moving me up. Moving, it's moving me up. Every step is moving me up.
Derek Jarman lived from 1942 to 1994. He was a multimedia artist, gay rights activist, and gardener. His work mainly focused on themes of masculinity and homosexuality, often looking at British history and culture through a queer lens. Starting out as a painter and going on to become a film director, Jarman developed a Renaissance-style aesthetic in his films, unconcerned with cinematic conventions like narrative and preferring to focus on spirit and visuals. Although he remained on the edges of mainstream, his work contributed to the changing landscape of British attitudes towards male homosexuality and AIDS throughout the 80s. Jarman was a true multimedia artist. Although he was mostly known for his feature films, he was also a painter, a writer, a set designer for both theatre and film, and a video artist. He explored many mediums throughout his career with a coherence and style that interconnected his work. Some are technical, such as the use of collage and object-trouve in painting and sculpture, superimposition and complex editing in film, and combinations of prose, poetry, journal entries, and philosophical musings in literary works. His artistic influences were classic Impressionist painters like Van Gogh, Monet, Paul Nash, Magritte. Landscape and architecture were important personal themes which reoccurred across his work, with one of his great passions being gardening. His 1979 film adaptation of William Shakespeare's The Tempest had costumes which drew on styles from multiple eras, serving as a chronology of 350 years of the play's existence, and the script was a cut-up restructuring of the original text. Although Jarman's most well-known art was his feature films, he also produced experimental shorts on Super 8. His Super 8mm shorts were seconds long and looped round. His moving image experiments were more akin to portraits or artworks than film, but these early forays into filmmaking enabled him to experiment with moving image and develop techniques particular to his style.
We started the 1980s with very primitive video, really, and we ended up with a sophisticated video, and on the way I discovered you could put the Super 8 onto video and then back to film. I mean, when I started, it was something we did in Beaconsfield in John Hall's garden shed. By the end of the decade, we were making feature films.
His use of many media was informed by a unified and coherent objective. He was clearly no mere follower of artistic fashion. At a time when pop art and commercial film were where the money was, Jarman stuck to his passions. Saleability was not a priority. As a painter, he did not aim to satisfy the market and the Bond Street apparatus, but rather pursued his own agenda. Across his work, Jarman's influences are evident. He developed an informed aesthetic, and his films have a layered sense of historical and cultural knowledge, while also conveying Jarman's own individuality and his ability to reinvent stories. To many, Jarman's cinema was inaccessible. Low budgets, ancient material, and the uncompromisingly explicit portrayal of homosexuality did not appease the values of critics at the time. In retrospect, this was what made him a pioneer of queer cinema. Sebastian, 1976, was Jarman's first film. It tells the story of Saint Sebastian, a Roman guard who is exiled to a remote outpost where he grapples with remaining committed to his Christian faith, while advanced on by other men who engage in a homosexual activity with each other. The film consists of reconstructions of famous classical paintings, for example Narcissus by Caravaggio, a painter Jarman would later make a film about. And while Saint Sebastian has long been a homoerotic icon through the medium of paintings, Jarman broke new ground in repositioning him in an environment which nurtures and accepts gay relationships. Sebastian's Latin dialogue and explicit eroticism makes it feel like a Renaissance painting brought to life. Exploring such themes and pairing them with masculinity and violence, the film was ahead of its time in its reinvention of historical narrative. A decade later, Jarman would make his most commercially successful film, Caravaggio. with a cast that by today's standards would feel like a surefire box office success.
Of Caravaggio's blend of fact and fantasia, Jarman said that he wanted to capture the image of reality in Caravaggio. He went on to ask, why is a Ken Loach film more real than a Ken Russell film? And why is Italian neo-realism more real than Michael Powell? For me, the answer is, they aren't.
In stark contrast, Jarman's last film, Blue, 1993, unravels expectations with a singular frame for the whole film instead of his usual painterly visuals. Blue's audience is this time asked to focus their ears.
The white flashes you are experiencing in your eyes are quite common when the retina is damaged.
Its soundscape is made by Brian Eno, and the voiceover relays ruminations of Jarman's struggle with AIDS towards the end of his life. Jarman was diagnosed with AIDS in 1986. While battling with this illness, he created many paintings about the epidemic and continued to protest against the rampant homophobia at the time.
When you discovered at the end of 1986 that you were HIV positive, you decided to let that be known. Why?
Jerry, I did it for myself, really for my own self-respect, because my whole life had been a struggle to actually make my life open. So if it was of any help for anyone else, that would have been, I'd be delighted.
Although witty, articulate and soft-spoken, Jarman was a confrontational filmmaker. As much as Mike Leigh or Ken Loach, he charted Britain's, and particularly England's, cultural and political landscape from the mid-1970s to the early 1990s. But unlike Leigh and Loach, his films embraced magical realism, flamboyant theatricality and provocative sexuality.